This is Monica Perez, and we are back today with our sixth installment of the reading and discussion of this book, The Octopus, Secret Government, and the Death of Danny Casolaro. It's a revised edition by Kenn Thomas and Jim Keith. Where we left off last time was in the middle of a thick chapter. I believe it was chapter 13. Nope. It's chapter 15, and it's called The Tentacles, or just Tentacles. And it goes through a lot of different specifics of how the octopus operates. We already covered the OSS in China, the Albanian operation, coup d'etat in Guatemala, Cuba, the Kennedy assassination. And that's where we left off. So let's dig right in. Southeast Asia. The main sources of the heroin supply shipped to America since the 1930s were established through the actions of the U.S. intelligence agencies, particularly the OSS and the CIA. The OSS was the predecessor of the CIA. Beginning in the mid-30s, through a collaboration with the Sicilian American Mafia and the Corsican underworld, the OSS helped create the French Connection, quote, in Marseille, France. You might remember the movie The French Connection, which was about heroin trafficking. The CIA in the early 1950s also supported the opium-growing Chinese nationalist Kuomintang in the Burmese Shan states. This was accomplished through two dummy corporations, Civil Air Transport, later named Air America. You might have heard of it from the Vietnam era. They had helicopters and stuff. And Barry Seal was one of the pilots. He was a guy who died under very mysterious circumstances and was connected to the Mena, Arkansas scandals with whatever they were running through there. And I think he died with George Bush Sr.'s or George Bush the First's phone number on a piece of paper in his wallet. So wrap your mind around all of that. And Sea Supply Corporation, flying in weapons and cash and flying out raw opium. Sea Supply, that sounds like Iran-Contra. Sea Supply had been founded by CIA man Paul Helliwell, who later played a prominent role in the Bay of Pigs and other CIA operations against Castro. Other airlines were partially or wholly owned by the CIA and were considered part of Air America. For a sense of the extent of the CIA's power, it should be noted that Air America was the largest airline in the world at the time of the Bay of Pigs. Wow. I did not realize that. I thought it was just little. Beginning in 1954, the U.S. began its war against Southeast Asian revolutionary movements. This meant collaboration with men like Ngo Dinh Nhu, the rich drug dealer who was the brother of South Vietnam President Ngo Dinh Diem, and tribes like the Montagnards, or Hmong, whose, I guess they just call them Hmong, but the Hmong, whose opium the CIA's Air America regularly transported. Wow, sounds like some parallels with Latin America and how operations unfolded there, both with respect to communist revolutionary movements and our response. Now, what I wonder about the communist stuff is, was any of it really grassroots, or was it all outside in, which would justify our involvement a little bit more? The Montagnard tribesmen assassinated an estimated 100,000 non-combatants in Cambodia, Laos, and Thailand. Among the Montagnards in Laos could be found alleged octopi and CIA Saigon Station Chief Shackley, with Thomas Kleins working in support of drug lord Vang Pao and his Mio tribes, with opium being shipped to mafia lord Santos Trafficante. That's funny because the Hmong population has been highlighted in recent years here in this country, and I believe Derek Chauvin might have been married to a Hmong woman. The Phoenix Project, run by Shackley and Kleins, with alleged participation by another supposed octopus operative, Dr. Earl Bryan, as well as Major General John Singlaub in Vietnam, in South Vietnam, in 1974 to 1975, was responsible for killing approximately 60,000 civilian Vietnamese, financing said to have been provided by Vang Pao drug monies. I would not be surprised. It was during this period in Vietnam that Clines and Shackley met arms dealer and rogue CIA man Edwin Wilson, with whom they were later to become close friends. Wilson is another person alleged by Casolaro to be a member of the Octopus. Shackley is mentioned in a letter from the drug lord Kun Sa to the U.S. government dated 28 June 1987. Quote, during the period 1965 to 1975, CIA chief in Laos Theodore Shackley was in the drug business. End quote. The letter also says, quote, Santos Traficante acted as his buying and transporting agent while Richard Armitage handled the financial section with banks in Australia. Next section, Watergate. Danny Casolaro's investigation of the Octopus continued to note many of the same individuals appearing and reappearing in the major conspiratorial scandals of the era. Casolaro attributed Watergate to the Octopus. Most of these guys are dead, right? And who is in their places? So when you think about the Trump administration retreading people like Bill Barr and Elliot Abrams, you think, okay, those are the guys who are already elbow deep in blood and money, black money. But who is the next gen? And definitely Kamala Harris. Like there's a straight line to her in secret societies. But you got to figure people like Buttigieg and I know Vance, obviously. But I just who are the real pullers of the strings. So a lot of these guys in this book were Republicans. But when I think about a really high-level cabal, I think Rahm Emanuel, David Axelrod, the whole Clinton era thing. But Clintons are in the Bush network. So, I mean, that could be like a smaller version of the bird with two wings. But I don't know. Any suggestions? I'd be happy to hear. Watergate and the fall of the mafia-funded politician Richard Nixon arguably began in April 1971 on the 10th anniversary of the Bay of Pigs debacle. E. Howard Hunt, allegedly retired from the CIA, although still working for the CIA front, Robert Mullen and Company, traveled to Miami, Florida, to recruit agents for the White House Special Investigations Unit, aka the Plumbers, from Bay of Pigs veterans. Richard Helms, an alleged Octopus member and DCI of the CIA at the time, was informed of the formation of the Plumbers on the first day of its operation. The personnel employed in the Watergate burglary were all veterans of the Bay of Pigs, but more importantly, all of them were also closely linked to the CIA, either as officials or contract agents. These were E. Howard Hunt, G. Gordon Liddy, Bernard Barker, who was E. Howard Hunt's lieutenant during the Bay of Pigs operation, Agency Security Specialist James McCord, Eugenio Martinez, who had been involved in 354 anti-Cuban forays only to find himself arrested at Watergate, and Frank Sturgis. I've heard of most of these guys. The CIA furnished psychological profiles to the team and also provided material assistance to Hunt. On June 17, 1972, the Plumbers were caught in the Democratic National Committee's offices at the Watergate complex in Washington, D.C. Theories as to what the Plumbers were doing in the Democratic headquarters vary from planting or removing an electronic bug to the theft of a secret file of information on a prostitution ring which implicated Democratic Party figures, or, in another version, John Dean. I don't understand. Theories to what the plumbers were doing vary from planting or removing an electronic bug to the theft of a secret file of information on a prostitution ring. Oh, which implicated either Democratic Party figures or implicated John Dean. Now, John Dean was the one who did Nixon in my opinion. A high treason against Nixon. I mean, not necessarily against the country, although I would say that was a coup and treasonous. White House aide Chuck Colson came to view the plumbers as a team whose first purpose was to spy on Richard Nixon, owing their allegiance only to the CIA. Richard Nixon also believed, according to his autobiography, so in his own words, which was titled R.N., The Memoirs of Richard Nixon, that he had been trapped. Quote, the whole thing was so senseless and bungled that it almost looked like some kind of setup. I would say so. Casolaro noted, quote, President Nixon and Attorney General John Mitchell were becoming impossible as far as the Octopus was concerned. Even Kissinger was being difficult in bypassing normal circles of intelligence with Vietnamization and the China card. Since this was the mission that reaped a windfall, how did all the pieces come together for the snowballing of, and then Casolaro's notes end. Maybe Watergate? I mean, this section of the book is like pure like Jim Keith notes. I'm not even sure it was like really written as a book because Jim Keith died very weirdly in 1999. I've mentioned this before. He was at Burning Man and he injured himself and he went in to get what was considered routine knee surgery and he died of a blood clot after, which was a thing. It's not a thing anymore because they hook you up to a machine. It was a thing. But anyway, so this smacks of notes that weren't totally finished by Jim Keith. So I'm going to read this again so we make sure we understand. So this was a note from Casolaro. President Nixon and Attorney General John Mitchell were becoming impossible as far as the Octopus was concerned. Kissinger was difficult in bypassing normal circles of intelligence with Vietnamization and the China card. So he was operating outside the CIA. Since this was the mission that reaped a windfall, how did all the pieces come together for the snowballing of, I don't know. Casolaro undoubtedly was referring to the distrust that had developed by 1972 between Richard Helms' CIA and the Nixon White House. Helms believed that Nixon was trying to co-opt the power of the CIA and undermine its strength with plans for a domestic intelligence agency. There is actually one now, right? The DIA. Apparently, Casolaro, who was head of that? General Flynn. And under his watch, it advocated the creation of an ISIS, an Islamic State on the border of Iraq and Syria. Check it out. Apparently, Casolaro believed that the Watergate debacle was a CIA or Octopus operation meant to destroy Nixon and his administration. I would think so. All right, next section. Assassination in Chile. The Octopus thrashed again in 1973 in Chile. Shackley and Kleins headed up the Track 2 CIA strategy in Chile, acting in support of DCI Helms and Henry Kissinger in the assassination of democratically elected President Salvador Allende Gossens. The hit, allegedly performed by 2 Cubans and 8 other assassination attempts against Chilean officials, those were what were masterminded by these guys, CIA guys. By his own admission, John P. Nichols, who later ran the Wackenhut Cabazon enterprise, was involved in the Allende assassination plot. As Casolaro wrote in his notes, a different, marginally more officious costume was worn in Chile. Since this operation provided accumulated debt for favors performed, the Octopus was now mature enough to know how to collect those debts. What were the favors performed, and what was the due bill? Iran, Iraq, Libya, and the October Surprise. CIA presence in Iran began circa 1953 with Operation Ajax, launched to defend British oil interests in the country against nationalist interests led by Dr. Mohammad Mossadegh. With CIA assistance, the Shah retained control in the country. In 1965, Oh, by the way, this is Iran. Yeah, that guy was secular. If you look at pictures of Iran in the 50s, they're walking around and like women are dressed just like American women. And I believe Afghanistan was the same thing. We did this. We made it and same thing with like Hamas and Palestine, all of that. We made it religious just to make it sound like it was religious. But our beefs are purely, I would say, pure power concepts about resources, land, commodities, depriving our hegemonic rivals of those resources. It's less about having it than the other guy not having it. That's what I feel about the progressive tax rate. It's not so much that the government wants your money. They can't figure out enough ways to spend it. They invent ways to spend it. They don't want you having it because that makes you more powerful. It gives you free time. You might go Ron Paul on them, and they do not like that. In 1965, Henry Kissinger masterminded a secret war employing the Kurds, supporting the Shah against Iraq. Additional support to the Kurds was provided by the Israelis. After the Iraqis launched a major attack against Kurdistan, Henry Kissinger washed his hands of the matter and suspended support. Starting in 1975, Kissinger, CIA Director William Colby, and Shackley intervened in Iran in support of governments friendly to the U.S. By 1980, however, the United States had switched its support to Iraq in opposition to Iran. In Libya, Edwin Wilson, along with friend and former CIA man Frank Turple, just a note on Iran. So it went from the secular government of Mossadegh to the Shah. But then when we were done with the Shah in the late 70s, the Ayatollah was installed straight from a commune in Paris. So do with that what you will. I think there was definite, I feel like they're cleaning up Iran of anyone who isn't controlled opposition right now. I don't know the vicissitudes of that over the past, whatever that would be, 45 years. But yes, these paradigm shifts, these ideological shifts are rarely organic, I think, even here. In Libya, Edwin Wilson, along with friend and former CIA man Frank Turple, worked for Gaddafi, training his air force, providing airplanes, weapons, and mercenaries, as well as a laboratory for the manufacture of assassination equipment and plastic explosives. Bombs that could be carried through airport metal detectors. Wilson also offered training of Gaddafi's forces in espionage, sabotage, and general psychological warfare. During this period, Wilson supplied reports on his activities to Theodore Shackley at the agency, and federal court testimony suggests that Wilson was acting through an arrangement with the CIA. Wilson also hired Cuban Bay of Pigs veterans like Rafael Chichi Quintero, whom he had met in 1967 through Thomas Klein's. Wilson is said to have made $15 million from this Libyan operation, but it was hardly the only money-making scheme that he was involved in at the time. Casolaro wondered out loud about the actions of the Octopus. Who drove the Shah out of power? Can best friends do this to each other? Side note, Casolaro may have been referring to the relationship between Helms and the Shah, dating from their childhood time together in a Swiss boarding school. What role did the Octopus play, and for what reasons? Who lit the fires for the war between Iran and Iraq? Casolaro asked. What part did the Octopus play? What was its purpose in the big picture? Is any picture that big? Jimmy Carter had bruised the Octopus as badly as Nixon, but with more directed focus. Why did the Octopus come off the ocean floor for this? To make sure no rescue was possible. What happened to those Sea Stallion helicopters, the most dependable helicopter in aviation history? Side note, this refers to the Carter administration's aborted attempt at rescuing the Americans held in Iran. Steve Bannon was there and then showed up at Reagan's inauguration. Everyone knows that hostages equals money, but why is it that no one has asked what happened to the billions of dollars in frozen assets? One of the ways in which Jimmy Carter may have bruised the Octopus, as Casolaro noted, was through the imposition of a 1979 embargo on the shipment of arms to Iran. Certainly that bruise healed quickly. Octopus familiar Ted Shackley appeared after his alleged retirement from the CIA in 1979 in 1984 negotiations for the shipment of arms to Iran by the Reagan administration. Shackley passed information from Iranian General Munakar Hashemi and Hashemi. Isn't he one of the guys we killed? Shackley passed information from Iranian Generals Munakar Hashemi and Munakar Ghorbanifar, who had held influential positions in the Savak secret police under the Shah and were close to the Ayatollah Khomeini, from those to Oliver North and alleged P2 member Michael Ledeen in the White House. The Iranians suggested that arms shipments to moderates such as themselves in Iran could do much to prevent the Ayatollah from taking sides with the Soviets and could speed the release of the American hostages. The billions of dollars of arms shipments began using Israel, Taiwan, and South Korea as middlemen as early as 1981, with some of the profits from the Iranian shipments being diverted to help the Contra cause in Nicaragua. I know where this is going. During the Reagan administration, the holy banner of a war on drugs was used to create a war in Nicaragua against the Sandinistas, funded in part by illegal drug trafficking. Prior to the arrival of guns from the CIA in 1982, the Contras were a ragtag band, by reports engaging in more cattle rustling than fighting against the Sandinistas. After small success initially against the Sandinistas in 1983, the CIA redoubled its aid to the Contras with additional aid, air support, and through the mining of Nicaraguan ports. At the same time, Contra leaders were negotiating weapons shipments through the Wackenhut-Cabazon arrangement in Indio, California. While the CIA was engaging in its merry little war, Congress was initiating legislation to halt the funding of the Contras, and by 1983, the Boland Amendment restricted above-board funding of the Contras. In violation of this congressional statute as well as international law, the CIA went ahead with covert funding and support. After a series of revelations about U.S. involvement in Nicaragua, however, the Contras found that their CIA supplies were beginning to dry up. Private donations were sought and channeled to the Contras through the NSC, with Marine Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North as the official contact point for the Contras. According to a report of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence released in 1987, North worked through at least 3 accounts at the Geneva branch of Credit Suisse, with monies being channeled to the Contras as well as the Mossad and the Afghan rebels. Albert Hakim and General Richard Secord were signatories on the account. The same branch of Credit Suisse was used by Munakar Ghorbanifar, alleged by the CIA to be a shared agent of the Mossad and the Iranian Savama Intelligence Agency, the successor agency to Savak, as well as Mossad agent Yaakov Nimrati in the purchase of U.S. armaments for Iran. Bush, Shackley, Kleins, Singlab, Hakim, Felix Rodriguez, and Rafael Chichi Quintero pop up again in various capacities providing arms to the Contras. Another major participant in the Contra supply operation was retired General John Singlab, who had been spotted in alleged Octopus circles since China during World War II. Did drug running have anything to do with the secret government's war in Nicaragua? Casolaro thought so. In his notes, he wrote, "Exploiting foreign policy objectives with the Contras in Nicaragua is one thing, but why was the creation of a Latin American equivalent to the Golden Triangle so irresistible?" Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North's Contra supply operation used known drug traffickers in the transport of weapons to the Contras, and those same traffickers shipped drugs bought from the Contras into the United States via military bases, which included Homestead Air Force Base near Miami. Major shipments of drugs were flown out of the ranch of CIA operative John Hull, who met on several occasions with Oliver North. Jack Bloom, special prosecutor for Senator John Kerry's Subcommittee on Terrorism, Narcotics, and International Operations, said in an interview, "There is no doubt in my mind that Oliver North knew about narcotics trafficking." Bloom is not the only one who linked North to drug trafficking. According to Tim Ross, a veteran BBC broadcaster in Colombia, In late 84, early 85, North brought 5 Afghani military advisors to Colombia on a speaking tour. 3 left, 2 stayed. The 2 that should be who stayed were chemists who introduced heroin manufacturing to Colombia. He also brought in an Israeli agronomist who helped to cultivate opium poppies. Although North has denied any involvement in drug trafficking, some entries in his diaries are difficult to explain. July 9th, 1984, quote, wanted aircraft to go to Bolivia to pick up paste. Want aircraft to pick up 1,500 kilos. And then in July 1985, quote, $14 million to finance supermarket came from drugs. The term supermarket refers to a Honduran weapons depot, which was used for Contra resupply. Yes, I feel like the jury is out or in on North, yet he went down as a hero. He had a radio show. My mother loved him, probably because he was cute, but very strange. Anyway, so this book we talked about, and I actually predicted when I first started reading this book, we started talking about it, the book was whatever it was, like $50 because it's small. And I predicted that it would go up in value. The next installment, the cheapest one was $500. There was one for $1,000 roughly. And so this book would be worth $500 at least, except for one little asterisk. I wrote in it. Sometimes I just get desperate. I'm in bed and there's no place to like get a piece of paper or I don't have a pencil. Anyway, little $500 asterisk right there. Not that I would sell the book, but it's nice to know that the books that we are all probably accumulating have some value, unlike the wine which my husband accumulates, which just disappears. It gets flushed down the drain. Anyway, I don't even know what the asterisk is for. I hope it's worth it. After North left the National Security Council due to his part in the Iran-Contra affair, a handwritten flowchart of some of his covert network, which he labeled, quote, Project Democracy. That's funny. That's, I guess, like the James Woolsey definition of democracy, was discovered in his safe. Project Democracy had been authorized by Reagan's National Security Decision Directive 77, while North had been appointed by NSC Director Robert McFarland to head up the covert networks. I mean, that was the asterisk. I don't know what I was talking about. Maybe Project Democracy I wanted to investigate. I don't know. North's flowchart lists approximately 20, quote, resource development and, quote, financial management companies, as well as gun running operations, including Amalgamated Commercial Enterprises, Southern Air Transport, Trans World Arms, Defects Portugal, and Udall Research Corporation. Linked to the CIA's General Secord, all of these were linked to the CIA's General Secord, Albert Hakim, Ted Shackley, and Thomas Kleins. That's what I'm saying. At the bottom of all of this, it's not only their geopolitics, it's not only reorganizing the entire world, but for those guys, it's about lining their pockets. And what are they doing with it? You know what I'm saying? Like, what are they doing? I mean, Clinton liked, I mean, I don't want to put it in politely, but he liked women. And he liked Coke and he liked drinking, right? I think that's all in the record. But how much illegal money can you spend? I've always thought that was the only advantage of fascism over communism. In communism, you have to hide the money because you're not supposed to be a fat cat. In fascism, or even this corporatism that we have, like being a fat cat, people are kind of proud of it. All right. Although I will say, when our government officials who have never had a private sector job are worth $100 million or something, it's like, well, I wrote a book. I mean, get out of here. Come on. What does Biden say? Come on. One factor links the majority of these companies. Funding from the National Endowment for Democracy. The National Endowment, National Endowment for Democracy. When I was making fun of that for being behind the Hong Kong riot, like protest, whatever, a couple of years ago, people were like, so what's wrong with the National Endowment for Democracy? It's like, it's a CIA cutout established by Reagan. Isn't that what everybody thinks of it as? I bet everybody listening now would do. NED includes in its management Henry Kissinger, Sally Shelton Colby, the wife of ex-CIA director William Colby, Barbara Haig, Alexander Haig's daughter, John Richardson of the CIA, a former law partner in Allen Dulles' Nazi-linked firm Sullivan and Cromwell, Carl Gershman, former head of Social Democrats USA and the Young People's Socialist Alliance, and Jay Lovestone, founder of the Communist Party USA. Links lead from Gershman and Lovestone to the Trust, the Bolshevik group led by Trotsky and Bukharin and financed by the Morgan Guarantee Trust, a company run almost entirely by Skull and Bones members and associated with Dulles' Sullivan and Cromwell law firm. When Dulles formed the CIA, Lovestone's socialist labor operations were merged with it, forming the American Institute for Free Labor Development. Strange bedfellows indeed in certain cases, both literally and figuratively. So literal bedfellows? Maybe because some of these are chicks, not that that's necessary for strange bedfellows. A little uncomfortable. Okay. Some Pentagon officials have privately and, rightly or not, stated that Kissinger, as well as Brzezinski, are KGB moles. Brzezinski, he hated Russia. Or was that, or did he? Brzezinski was allegedly recruited during the time he was part of a study group of New World Order roundtabler William Yandell Elliott, which included Kissinger as a member. Kissinger is alleged to have joined a KGB homosexual spy ring. There you go. So that they were talking about that, which had penetrated EUCOM, EUCOM, G2 headquarters in Oberammergau. Come on, I can do better than that. Oberammergau, Germany, at World War II's end. Kissinger is also closely connected to the Chatham House British intelligence think tank, definitely, the nexus of post-roundtable New World Order influence. In 1983, the NED was organized as a private foundation, although financed by Congress to the tune of $80 million. Its private status kept it safe from Freedom of Information requests. Nice. As well as government audits. NED has been involved in hundreds of programs as a private CIA, including destabilizations of President Marcos of the Philippines. But I think the CIA just installed his son. And the Panamanian government, support for the Nazi PAN party in Mexico, channeling of money to the Contras, and support for operatives of the Medellin drug cartel. Some observers have stated that the NED's operations are more extensive and more effective than those of the CIA. You would think so if it's more secret. Can you call it the NED or does it have to be the NED? The NED has been alleged to be a private intelligence network with the purpose of establishing a fascist, corporatist world state, a theme which also seems to inform the movements of Casolaro's Octopus. The model of this state can be observed in Michael Ledine's book, Universal Fascism, in which he extols a fascist state based upon the ideals of Gabriele D'Annunzio, Mussolini's predecessor. Ledine was connected to P2, which was in turn connected to the NSC. I think I lost the thread on the NSC. NSC? Did we just learn what that meant? Let's make sure. I do not see it. Reporting directly to North, as well as being a consultant in the Pentagon and State Department, was Michael Ledine. Ledine was responsible for obtaining Israeli Mossad spy Jonathan Pollard his job in the Department of the Navy, for establishing a line of Israeli influence into the NSC, and is known in Italy to have been a member of the Propaganda Due P2 Masonic Lodge. P2, with a membership believed to include Henry Kissinger and Alexander Haig, is the organization known to have taken over the highest levels of Italian government and responsible during the 70s and 80s for an attempted bankrupting of the Vatican in an alliance that linked the P2, the KGB, and major networks of drug trade. The Wall Street Journal detailed a meeting between Alexander Haig, Michael Ledeen, and high-ranking P2 member and number 2 man in Italian intelligence Francesco Pazienza. Pazienza is said to have been involved in shipments of U.S. arms to Iran arranged by the Reagan administration. The direct historical antecedent of P2 was the Propaganda Uno Lodge of Freemasons Giacomo Mazzini and Albert Pike. Yeah, Uno, for sure. In the 19th century, P1 was directly involved in the creation of Marxism, anarchism, and syndicalism. So anarcho-syndicalism was, I believe, one of the factions in the Spanish Revolution. Maybe it was the type of communism, but anarcho-syndicalism is anarchism, but basically with state-owned means of production. So like kind of pure communism, I would guess. A form of pure communism. Anarcho-capitalism is private property ownership. So for me, you can't really have, the only way to have no government, like no overarching government, anarchy, is to have private property ownership, because you keep order both within your borders and in your transactions with others. If you remove that, then how do you, I mean, you have to own something. You have to eat. You know, how do you enforce that? So what you're really saying is that a collective owns it, and that collective is going to have a representative or a committee there. So you're really not going to have, I just don't think anarcho-syndicalism is possible. But that never stopped these guys, right? So they were directly involved in the creation of Marxism, anarchism, and syndicalism, in programs sponsoring both fascism and communism, and in a plan reportedly launched at the 1815 Congress of Vienna designed to combat the spread of the democratic movement of the United States. At the Congress of Vienna, it is alleged that a program to institute a new age was concocted, and that Italian fascism, German Nazism, and the Bolshevik Revolution were variant attempts at international political disruption. Is this the essence of the philosophy of the men in Casolaro's Octopus? Interesting. You know, I think about that sometimes, that this, for lack of a better term, democracy or the democratic republic or something like the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, that empowers the people and makes the government, the authority the people relinquish to or whatever, give as agents to the government, that they have accountability. I mean, I know like nothing's real or whatever, Baudrillard, or, you know, I know everything's fake. You can crap on all of that, but I think it's got value, and I think it's I just got a weird thing that like my phone is being logged into in Chicago, or my computer. Anyway, you know, that it has value. It has value, and it's I don't know how it emerged. I mean, I understand it was probably a plot or a gimme. Like that's what they say about bringing socialism to Latin America. It was to prevent communism. I mean, that's what you do, right? Isn't that what the original Magna Carta was? Just an appeasement. So maybe it's an appeasement, maybe it's a psyop, whatever, but I think it has value. And I think we are now in the phase where they realize that it's not, that they have the perfect excuse with technology, which probably is why they implemented it, to tell us that that's no longer viable, that we have too centrally controlled a system to have individual rights or anything. I mean, you hear it from all sides now. But these guys are saying this started basically in 1815. I wouldn't be surprised. And speaking of surprises, the October surprise. The October surprise, if factual, The October surprise, if factual, can be viewed as yet another stunning coup d'etat, like the assassination of Kennedy and the ouster of Nixon. Yeah. The October surprise is the persistent allegation that individuals high in the administration of Ronald Reagan had, with or without the president's knowledge, arranged for 52 American hostages held in Iran to be detained until after his election, thus stealing the thunder, and a landslide of votes, from his opponent Jimmy Carter, derailing his reelection. Casolaro, on the October surprise, as well as the Insula case, excerpted from his Behold a Pale Horse book proposal. So I mentioned this before. Bill Cooper wrote Behold a Pale Horse around the time that Casolaro was going to name his book that. But before Casolaro died, he'd already changed his book proposal title to The Octopus. But I'm reading this and I'm thinking, a coup, right? That's what he said, a coup like Kennedy and Nixon. It was a coup against Jimmy Carter. But now I'm thinking for absolute positive, sure, Reagan didn't know about that. Or if he did, wasn't smart enough to figure out the punchline. Bush did this coup, which means that the immediate assassination of Reagan, which was attempted in his first year of office by a friend of the Bush family, was part of this plot. It had to have been the plan all along. While rumors of the hostage release delay circulated for years after the election of Ronald Reagan, it wasn't until 1988 that testimony was offered by two covert operatives in two different courts regarding their knowledge and participation of a hostage release stall managed by then Reagan campaign chief William Casey. That's why I always point out that Steve Bannon was there at the failed hostage rescue attempt. But now, two more covert operatives have emerged from that desert reservation in the journey of this story effort to confirm that previous testimony and provide richer details regarding the laundered payment by the Saudis and other particularities in order to prevent what Casey feared the most, a surprise release of the hostages before the election, almost guaranteeing windfall votes for President Jimmy Carter. The alleged reward to another Reagan insider for that mission to Iran in the summer of 1980 has been almost wholly responsible for the leaks leading to this odyssey. For it was in that reward, in the form of a multi-million-dollar government contract, that technologies were found to have been stolen by the government from another company. In that other company's recovery from bankruptcy, its CEO has been the real-life star and gumshoe in this drama that continues to unfold each day. This is where we're circling around to the topic of our book. Casolaro also wrote, quote, "Since Reagan was not a favorite son of the Octopus, why did it work so hard to ensure his selection in 1980? Even if the participation by campaign officials in holding the hostages until the election was limited to just the acquiescence of smiling gentlemen who knew better, why was the veil removed when it could have been so absolutely secret?" Casolaro obviously believed in stories that a deal had been struck by George Bush and other members of the Reagan administration with the Ayatollah Khomeini to detain the hostages. That arms shipments to moderate factions in Iran had begun shortly after the deposing of the Shah as early as 1980 is fact. The evidence for the October surprise begins with statements of Abul Hassan Bani Sadr, the former president of Iran, who claimed after the fact knowledge of the event. Another source backing up the Bani Sadr story was Ari Ben Menashe, a member of Israeli intelligence who corroborated Bani Sadr and also offered insider knowledge about the Insula case, you might recall. Other sources varied in terms of their credibility. Additionally suggestive is that there is a 21-hour gap in George Bush's schedule corresponding to the time he was supposed to have been in Paris negotiating the hostage detainment, and conflicting stories from Bush and his staff about what he was doing when the alleged negotiation with the Iranians took place. In an affidavit attorney Paul D. Wiltshire sent to Attorney General Janet Reno, he too detailed the existence of a, quote, shadow government, paralleling in precise terms the Casolaro Octopus and their participation in the October surprise. Quote, the October surprise treason refers to the top secret trip then vice presidential candidate and former CIA director George Bush, along with a plane full of some 25 to 30 other top CIA covert operatives, including a handful of prominent Republican and Democratic senators and congressmen, took to Paris on the weekend of October 18th and 19th, 1980. While in Paris, Bush secretly met with the representatives of the Ayatollah Khomeini, paid them bribes in the amount of $40 million, and promised to deliver to the man additional $5 billion in arms. The shipments of these arms began flowing even before the election, in exchange for the Iranians' agreement not to release the 52 American hostages they held in Tehran until after the November 4th, 1980 U.S. presidential elections. In order to guarantee the humiliation and defeat of President Jimmy Carter in that election, and in order to cement the CIA's lock on the White House for the next 12 years under George Bush. 12. Well, why would they say that? It would really be 16 is how it would have to go. I mean, it was, in fact, 12. Oh, because this was after the fact. This was Clinton, the Clinton administration looking back. It's weirdly put. Okay. The Reagan and Bush administrations and Congress in separate House and Senate October surprise investigations in 1992 have tried to tell us that the October surprise never happened, that Bush and his CIA cronies never made the secret trip to Paris on October 18th and 19th, and that no secret deal with Iranians was ever struck. But that simply is not true, as the 16 covert operatives referred to below will demonstrate in their forthcoming testimony. They will even produce a videotape to prove both the October surprise treason and George Bush's participation in it beyond all shadow of any doubt. Ever see that tape? Me neither. Mr. Wiltshire, age 46, was later found in his apartment dead from unknown causes. Oops. Yeah, that was, I was just reading from the affidavit of Paul Wiltshire. Sent to Janet Reno. So it wasn't necessarily a Clinton investigation, but it was just during the Clinton administration. Yeah, Clinton wouldn't turn on Bush. Also involved in shipments of arms to Iran was the Italian Masonic P2 Lodge, according to the sources of researcher Barbara Honegger. The Grand Master of the P2 was Licio Gelli, who allegedly was closely linked to Theodore Shackley when the latter was stationed in Rome. Let's see. Last time the StreamYard crapped out at around this time. I'll do one more. I'll do Cabazon Wackenhut. Cabazon Wackenhut. Alleged Octopus member John P. Nichols arrived at the Cabazon Reservation in 1978. One former CIA man, however, who chooses to remain anonymous, said in an interview that Wackenhut had a presence on the Cabazon Reservation since at least 1959, and that guys have disappeared down there at the Cabazon Reservation for a long time. The Wackenhut Cabazon connection includes a number of players pivotal in Casolaro's Octopus investigation. Here, in an endeavor run by one of the largest private police forces in the world, Contras and criminals bargained for arms shipments and met with CIA operatives. Here, testing of fuel-air explosives were allegedly performed, a technology said to have been used later by extremist Islamic groups against the U.S. military in Iran. Here, the voicing of an unwanted opinion, as in the case of Fred Alvarez, might leave your life forfeit. With his investigation of the Cabazon Reservation, Danny Casolaro was treading on dangerous ground indeed. Many of the events that took place in the final days of Danny Casolaro's life are connected to Wackenhut. Casolaro was investigating the unsolved murders of Alvarez and his friends on the Cabazon Reservation and planned to visit the reservation. Casolaro's death is alleged to have occurred shortly after he had requested an interview with John Philip Nichols about the Cabazon-Wackenhut collaboration. Casolaro's contact with the two women who looked, quote, too good to be true may have been just that. Wackenhut has been shown to use women to compromise their targets, as in Wackenhut covert operations connected to the Alaskan pipeline. Oh, like Chloe's. Yeah, beware of hot chicks with huge guns. Is it possible that these women were pumping Casolaro for information to find out just what he knew and just what leads he was following? Some of the figures with whom Casolaro was associating with were connected to Wackenhut, including Nichols and Riconosciuto. Finally, the COM-12 briefing alleges that the Wackenhut Special Services Team and the NSA contacted the Martinsburg police and told them that they would investigate the Casolaro death and that the police should keep this secret. Well, that is probably a good place to end. And next time we'll start with the Nugan Hand Bank. Oh, yeah. Okay, that was very interesting. So that ends part 6, if I'm not mistaken, of our reading of The Octopus, Secret Government, and the Death of Danny Casolaro, the revised edition by Kenn Thomas and Jim Keith. So thank you all for joining me for that. And I will be back next week with a real newsreel. Later.